I had a very pampered childhood. My parents were quite possessive and very protective of me. I had lots of questions. I remember returning back home and not being able to sleep that night. So the very following day, I went to work and handed over my resignation.
For being such a quiet and unassuming person, when she sets her mind to something, she can be very headstrong.
Nothing was planned, or this is not something that I actively set out to do. My parents were very reluctant, but I was quite adamant in
Yes.
wanting to follow something that I could help children in. That made my wedding day even more special.
I feel sometimes that as women we do that. We sort of punish ourselves a little bit about
We
not
do.
being able.
Especially young girls, the boys somehow thug it out, and but the girls, they are very vulnerable and they get easily manipulated and fall into exploitation.
Right. Hello and welcome to the debrief with me, Roel Raymond. This week I have a very quiet and unassuming person, not very opinionated, but she's so resilient and she stands up for people who don't have a voice and so focused on being a humanitarian. Please welcome my friend and former neighbor, Razni Razick. Hi Razni.
Hi, Roel.
So happy to have you on. I think
Thank you for having me.
even though we've known each other for about close to 3 years now, lived in the same premises for close to 3 years. This is the first time I'm interviewing you.
Yes.
So happy to have you on my show. My first question, I want to take you, of course, right to the start a little bit so I can introduce you to my audiences. Where do you come from? What school did you go to? Are you the only child? What did your parents do? Just some kind of background.
Yeah, so I'm from Gampala. I schooled at Ecole International in Kandy. I have one sibling, an elder brother, and my mother is a lawyer by profession and my father is a civil engineer. So I schooled and worked throughout in Kandy, and after my marriage moved to Colombo.
Right. So tell me how you got involved in your humanitarian work, because did it happen in school through Interact clubs or anything like that, or how did you end up?
No, in school I was a very mischievous child. I wasn't involved in any clubs as such, but it was after I left school and I started working at the Doctors Welfare Society in Kandy at the Kandy Teaching Hospital as an early childhood educator there, and I happened to visit a center for street children to meet a friend of mine, and that was the defining moment for me. That I think that visit unlocked my calling in life, and that is when I decided that this is what I was meant to do all along.
Right. So how did you even get into, now you said at the teaching hospital you were doing something. Now most other children at your age, I would assume about 18, 19, would be thinking about, I don't know, social life, going out, partying. But what made you go and want to even volunteer there?
When I visited my friend, it wasn't with the intention of volunteering. I just went to meet her to hand over some of her stuff that I had with me. But then visiting the center that day and hearing the sad plight of the children, it was a drop-in daycare center for street children where they get dropped off in the morning and they get picked up in the evening again and they go back to the streets. So that was the reality that they lived was something that cannot be fathomed by us, or something that we never even see or hear in the movies. So I had a very pampered childhood. My parents were quite possessive and very protective of me. So I think I was shielded from this side of the society. I had lots of questions. I remember returning back home and not being able to sleep that night. So the very following day, I went to work and handed over my resignation, and I went on to volunteering at the center right away. And for 3 years, I got dropped off. My driver would drop me off at the Candy Teaching Hospital, and I take a trishaw from there and go to the center to volunteer and get back in the afternoon just before my driver got back to pick me up. So I did this for 3 years without the knowledge of my parents or anybody. And because I knew that if they found out, they wouldn't approve. That visit impacted me a lot. The smiles and the gratitude that I received from the children there is what was a powerful stimulant for me to continue
doing what you're doing. I think most of you will understand now what I mean by for being such a quiet and unassuming person. When she sets her mind to something, she can be very headstrong. So here she's gone through quite a bit of trouble to get to volunteer at this center without even her parents knowing. So you moved to Colombo in 2017 after you got married. Did you have to sever ties with the organization in Kandy, or how did you get into work here?
When I moved to Colombo 2017. So my husband is also equally passionate about volunteering, and I got to know that we had been volunteering for the same organization at the same time, myself from Kandy and him from Colombo. So he was very supportive, and I was very vocal about what I needed to do and what I wanted to continue in doing. So I continued supporting these children in whatever way I could, and I still travel once a month to Kandy. And every time I go to Kandy, I visit the institutions and visit the children there, and I'm very much in touch with all the organizational heads that I have been working with there throughout.
So you get married in 2017, you move to Colombo, and then you also do something very big. You start your own organization. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yes, so soon after I moved to Colombo, I initiated my organization called Carestation. Carestation is a non-profit, non-political, non-religious organization working towards community development and social welfare. I teamed up with a friend of mine who I got to know through the flood relief efforts, and just the two of us, and with the support of my husband, we initiated the organization. At the time, we did not intend to start a full-fledged organization. We just merely wanted to help people in need. But over the years, it has grown into 365 registered members, and we have projects running in 22 districts, and we have and the projects are carried out throughout the year.
Right. You must be very happy with the progress you've made, Razni, just by following your heart.
Definitely, because nothing was planned, or this is not something that I actively set out to do. So, we just intended to do good, and I think, everything paved its way.
Yeah. And just to go back to your parents again, what did they want you to be? What was the plan?
Actually, my brother is a lawyer as well. So being a lawyer or a doctor was what they always wanted me to do. But I was very fond of children growing up. So for my higher studies, I chose child psychology, much against their wishes, because at the time there wasn't much scope on psychology, and it was after the tsunami that people started recognizing counseling psychology. So at the time there wasn't much scope here. So my parents were very reluctant, but I was quite adamant in wanting to follow something that would that I could help children in.
Yeah. So I'm glad you followed your heart in all of these matters. Speaking of children and your love for children, you already have little Isa, and now another one on the way. It can't be easy running an organization and a home and everything that you do. So how do you, this is a very cliche question, but how do you manage? How are you easy on yourself? Because it's so important to be easy on yourself and not give yourself a hard time about maybe not being able to do as much as you want to. Or I feel sometimes that as women we do that. We sort of punish ourselves a little bit about not being able. How do you manage?
It's quite challenging, to be honest. It is something that I struggle with, and I need to learn how to balance. But my husband has always helps me rebalance, and I try to prioritize family, especially on weekends, because this is a very demanding field, and people reach out to you at all times of the day, and they reach out to you in some kind of urgency and support, and if you do not assist them right away, it can be too late sometimes. And therefore I try to make myself available for them, and keep the weekends free for family. It's like, having multiple browser screens open all the time,
Yes.
day and night.
Yes.
And even when you want to shut off, when you go home and you attempt to shut off, you know that the children and the families in your caseload are living their reality, and no matter how horrendous it can fall apart anytime.
Yes.
So there's always that constant dilemma in you, and wanting to assist them, and also trying to get some break in between for yourself.
Yeah, it can't be easy. I mean, it's hard enough for the people who juggle life, work and their extracurriculars and whatever. But you're using your free time, or not even your free time, most of your time is being used towards helping other people. So that's really great. One story about you really seared itself into my memory, and that is the story of how you invited the children from your candy center to your wedding instead of bridesmaids. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how that came about?
Yes. So when my marriage got fixed, there was no doubt that I was going to have my children, definitely all the children that I worked with at my wedding, because I had worked with them for many years, and I knew that people always come and go, the volunteers come and go, and you have donors who visit the institutions, they come and go, but they always bring something materialistic for these children, and they don't there are no long-term volunteers also, so, and they don't get that exposure to the society, and they had no clue of what a party looked like, what a wedding was like. And also getting the approvals from the authorities is a very strenuous process, so nobody takes that extra effort to do it. So I knew that I somehow wanted them to be there. So that is when I actually spoke to my parents and told them, instead of inviting my friends and family, I wanted them to be there. And that is when they got to know that I have been involved in this kind of work, and I have been actually volunteering for so long with the children. Initially they were also quite hesitant, because due to security concerns of the children, and also our weddings are very lavish and extravagant. I remember my brother had 2,000 guests at his wedding, so I knew that my parents wanted to have a similar setup. So convincing family, friends that I wanted to invite these children instead of them was quite challenging, but we somehow made it happen, and my wedding took place in like 3 weeks time. So we got the children were really excited. I still remember when I took the wedding invitation card, they every time I visited the center, they asked me, is it true, is it true, is it true? And when I took the invitation card, they pass it around, and they were all flocking together and so excited. And we had the dresses sewn for them, and I had 12 flower girls. Some of them were from the streets, the children I knew personally, and then there were 80 guests, some homeless families whom I knew, and guests from the childcare institutions I worked at. And so just a week before the wedding, the authorities said that you can't have this, we can't allow, because this hasn't been done before, and we have concerns of security, and so you cannot. So it was like really devastating, because the children were looking forward to it, the dress was sewn, and what they told me was I could, after the function, I could visit the center and give them a meal, but that's what everybody does, and that is not what the children really want. I wanted them to be present, and to make them feel special, and I knew that if I wanted to give them that experience, because I knew them personally. These were none of the children who attended were children that I handpicked, just from any institution, but these are children that I had worked with for years, and I personally knew, and some of them whom I had connected from the streets to the institutions as well. So Yeah, somehow, so we got the legal, it was back and forth to the authorities and getting the approvals and convincing them. And somehow on that day, yeah, they were very, very happy. We had rehearsed the whole function several times, but on that day when they were so fascinated by the lights, by the decor, and they had to be urged to move forward, and they were very tired as well.
Yes.
Falling as dozing off on the throne was also a memorable thing. And up till date, they still talk about it when I visit. And I think some of the guests had shared about it on social media, and it went viral. And I think one of the magazines covered the story, so they have the paper cutting in their rooms. When I recently visited, I realized that they still have their paper
Yeah.
cutting in their room. And yeah, so it was a very memorable day for me. That made my
Day.
wedding day even more special.
And you certainly marked the day for them as well, because, like you said, I mean, perfect examples of you being resilient and stubborn again in the face
Yes.
of like opposition. You will somehow stand and make sure that you get what you want, which is something that benefits other people. And also something that I keep thinking about is that we think in terms of shelter, food, maybe education. For children who don't have, but we never think in terms of life experiences. So whether it's a wedding, a party, whether it's a trip, these are not things that generally they would have access to. So it's really, really amazing that you did that. Also, another issue I want to tie to this is this habit of, now this is something I've seen on social media that people are beginning to have a conscience about, where you go to a children's home during your birthday and you cut your cake and you do all of that. But where does that come from? You know, does it really come from your heart? Are you just marking some kind of social, is it like a virtue marker? I'm just doing this to be pious or good or whatever.
Yeah.
And people themselves on social media have started questioning this. Why are you all doing that? If you want to help a home, help them right through, or just send the food or whatever it is.
Yes.
Why do you need to go there, take pictures and do all of this? What is your take on all of that, having worked with these children?
Yes, actually it does more harm than good, and I know people intend well, and daily, even I very frequently get requests from people, asking me to recommend a care home, a very deserving care home to, celebrate their birthdays, or to, whenever there's a special occasion, the first thing that people want to do, if they want to do good, they think of, we can visit a center, visit a home. When especially parents with young children, they want to take their child and show them, the less fortunate children. So it does a lot harm than good, actually. And most of these children who are in childcare institutions don't even know their actual birthday. They do not have a birth certificate, and I know that they don't know why their birthdays are celebrated, and they despise being forced to come forward and sing the song and have a piece of cake. And actually that is not something that they look forward to or that makes them happy at all. Instead, what I suggest is they could sponsor a child's birthday, a cake, the child who is at the institution, or sponsor a trip for them. If those are costly, then you can always call the administration and find out what they are lacking and what they need, and then donate it directly to them, rather than, and if you want to show children, you can get them engaged in activities, so simple acts of kindness every day. You don't necessarily have to take them to an orphanage to show them, but it's actually does a lot harm than good.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. And as somebody who's actually worked in that field, it's important that it's coming from you as well. Another thing that I wanted to highlight was the fact that at 18, a lot of these children are forced out because the state no longer takes care of them. And I know personally people, young girls and boys, who have just no recourse afterwards. They don't know where to go. Obviously, they don't have homes, families, no networks. Sometimes there are organizations that get involved and try to help them for 6 months in internships and stuff like that. But I mean, you're putting them back, not you. The state is putting them back in a vulnerable position where they're, again, especially I would say a girl child, but it applies to both, where they are sent out with no support system. So how would you think that the state ought to tackle this?
Definitely, there is unfortunately no proper mechanism to support these vulnerable youth who leave the childcare institutions, and they are all the children in childcare institutions are compelled by the Sri Lankan law to leave the care home once they turn 18, and they have no social exposure, and they're suddenly sent out and made to fend for themselves on their own. And most of the children now, for example, the institutionalization of street children is very common. So once the child is sent back to the society, the only place they're familiar with and they know is the streets. So they go back to the streets, and especially young girls, the boys somehow thug it out, and but the girls, they are very vulnerable, and they get easily manipulated and fall into exploitation. And so many homeless families that I know of also happen to be children who had left the care homes once they were 18, because there are over 14,000 children in over 400 childcare institutions in Sri Lanka. So there's no proper mechanism to support these children once they leave the childcare system. But like you said, there are individual organizations and welfare societies that support these children, and there is a advocacy group that I have been involved with since its inception back in 2017, called the 18 Plus Alliance, that works in advocating for these care leavers. And also there is a group called the Generation Never Give Up Network, formed by the care leavers for the care leavers. Nice. And they support the caregivers who leave the childcare institutions to lead an independent life, and they give them the guidance and support they need.
Okay, that's really great. I mean, it's great that they're doing it for themselves, but the hope is, of course, that the state will do a lot more than it's already doing. Because you're working with society and the downtrodden and all the cracks in society, you see the people who've fallen through the cracks, and because you're in there in the trenches actually helping people, I'm sure there's a lot that you know needs to be fixed. But if you could, off the top of your head, right now, the top 3 things that you could fix, if you could, what would they be?
It would be discriminating people and stereotyping people based on, how they look, where they come from, the school they attended, the profession that they do. If you could reach out to everybody with empathy, I think that is where we need to start. And also the childcare system and the childcare policies, the rules need to be made more stringent and implemented. There are so many rules, but they are not implemented. And the protection of children should be paramount to, everything else.
All right, Razni, thank you so much for coming. And more than anything else, thank you so much for what you do. Like I said, you're actually in the trenches. You get in there and you help people who have fallen through the cracks. And these are the people, most people just put blinkers on and pretend not to see. I think a lot of people just try to deal with the guilt by maybe giving a little cash here and there or something like that. Nobody really wants to get involved, and you're willing to get your hands dirty. And that's why I said, for a quiet and unassuming person who sometimes doesn't even meet your eyes when she's speaking to you, Razni makes a big impact in the work she does. And that's why so many people seek her out and speak to her, look for advice and for help. So thank you for being you. Thank you for following your heart and following your conscience and doing what you're doing. Thanks.
Thank you so much for having me, Roel.
You're welcome.